Mr. Donald Forsman. He was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was in the 34th Bomb Group, 7th Bomb Squadron of the 8th Air Force, and he was a ball turret gunner in B-17s during World War II. So I guess my first question for you is, where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, it was a Sunday, as you know, and we had come in from church and were just sitting down to Sunday dinner when my dad turned on the radio and it said Pearl Harbor had been bombed. It might have been a little later than Sunday noon. I don't know what time. We had to get out of church and get dinner ready and everything. So I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. So I ran up to a neighbor boy's and I said, "Can I borrow your encyclopedia?" And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I want to find out where Pearl Harbor is." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because it's been bombed." I said, "It sounds like we're at war." And he said, "Well, let's look it up." So we looked up where Pearl Harbor was. Didn't mean a thing to us. Hawaii, nobody talked about going to Hawaii in those days. And, this was 1941. I was 16, just a junior, I guess, in high school. And from that point on, our age group, nobody thought about not going to war. If you were able, you were ready. And so it all went from there. My brother was drafted very soon after that. And he was drafted into the combat engineers. But I didn't want any part of that. I didn't want any part of the infantry because all my life I'd wanted to fly. First time I ever went up, I was about 6 years old. I went up in an airplane called a Bluebird that was made down at OK, Oklahoma. And I sat on a board behind the pilot, believe it or not. No seat belt, nothing like that. But we just took one loop, one circle around Hatbox Field in Muskogee, and I was hooked. I wanted to fly. And I didn't want to be a gunner. In February, a group of us, about 8 of us, enlisted in the Army Air Corps. And they promised us, you'll send you to college and you'll all be pilots and you'll all fly your own pursuit planes and, usual recruiting talk. And so February, while we were sworn in, well, I thought as soon as August 14th came, my birthday, my 18th birthday, that I would get my notice. I didn't get my notice up until September. I remember I came in the night I turned 18 and I said to my mother, I said, "Did I get my call?" And she said, "No, you didn't." Of course, she didn't want me to, but, it was all from there. So we graduated from high school in 1943 and spent the summer. I did a variety of things. At that time, I was working for the Tulsa Tribune because my cousin, Lee Gillette, was the head photographer, and I did the night stuff for the Tulsa Tribune. And then I worked at a little grocery store on the corner, not about a block from my house. I was raised up right here in Tulsa at 6th and Lewis, or 6th and Atlanta, actually, but everybody knows where Lewis is, but nobody knows where Atlanta is. And it was a pretty nice neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood and all like that. Went to Kendall Grade School, Woodrow Wilson Junior High School, and graduated from Will Rogers High School. Then in September, I was called to report to Oklahoma City. I was very thin in those days, and I got down to Oklahoma City and I had a little boil here on my chest, and I was running a fever, and I didn't make the weight. You was supposed to weigh, I think it was 120 pounds, and I didn't weigh 120 pounds. And so the doctor that examined me said, "You got a fever. I can't pass you. You're going to have to go home." I said, "Oh, I don't want to go home." I said, "I run a fever with everything I ever have. It doesn't matter what it is. I'll have a temperature." And he said, well, I can't pass you because of your weight. And I said, how long do you stay here today? Well, he said, we close at 5. I said, do you know any quick way to put weight on? He said, well, best thing probably is bananas and water. I went out and I think I bought a dozen bananas, and I ate those dozen bananas, and I drank all the water I could drink. And I went back in and I barely tipped the scale enough to get by. He said, well, I'm going to pass you. He said, if it's true you're running a temperature anytime you have anything wrong, you'll be all right tomorrow, and you'll be all right when you take your physical down Wichita Falls. So I went to Wichita Falls, Shepherd Field. You ever been there? Mm-hmm. Shepherd Field is the only place in the world you can stand knee-deep in mud and choke to death on dust. And I took my basic there, along with all these 8 guys that I had enlisted with, buddies in high school. But I got an infection on my lip, and I don't know what caused it. I think the guy hit me with a bayonet in doing drilling, and such. And it landed me in the hospital. And so I lost a week. Well, if you lose a week of basic in those days, you had to go back and pick that week up. Plus, it's just a big mess. Well, all of my buddies began to ship out in the latter part of November, and I was put back in another group and such. Then I had some impacted wisdom teeth. And I had an experience getting those out with the Army dentist that I won't go into because it was too painful to think about, because he shot me with the Novocaine or whatever they used, and then sat me out in the hall and forgot about me. And when he came out to go to lunch, he said, well, haven't I worked on you? And I said, no, sir, you haven't. He said, well, come in here. I'll take those teeth out. Well, he started working on me, and Novocaine had worn off, and I said, Major, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but if you do that again, I'm going to bite your damn fingers off. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to set you out there in the hall and you just wait till I get back from lunch and I'll shoot you again. So he had to shoot me again, take the wisdom teeth out. But anyhow, make a long story short, when I took my psychomotor, psychophysical, and all those tests, 98 of us took the test. 97 of us flunked. The only guy that passed, his father was a colonel in the Pentagon. And, to his everlasting credit, he went on to gunnery school with the rest of us. We discovered later, when we were on the train and had our orders, that our orders were cut 3 days before we ever took the test. They needed gunners. We got to Harlingen. And I've always said, someone asked me, why in the world did you take the ball turret? I said, well, I didn't take the ball turret. They asked, how many of you are claustrophobic? And I didn't know what the word meant, and I didn't raise my hand. A lot of them did. They knew what it meant. And so I went into the ball turret.
Were you claustrophobic?
No. Never was. Never have been. You couldn't stand it if you were a ball turret gunner and claustrophobic. Mm-hmm. And I guess one of the scariest times I ever had in the ball turret was the first time I ever got in it. We were on a second floor. The ball turrets were all mounted in this room, and they were showing us how to get in. To get in a ball turret, your friends probably told you about it, but you just sit down like I'm sitting right here. Bend over, lock the locks on the door. You want to make sure you do that. And then turn the switches on and just roll over on your back. So you're just really laying on your back with your legs bent up like this and then straight out. They're right alongside your guns. Well, I loved gunnery training because I'd been a hunter all my life. The only problem was that in basic, they put a carbine in my hand, which was the Air Force gun, really, and I put it over where I always shoot, left-handed. And the sergeant came along and said, you can't shoot a carbine left-handed. The shells go across your face. You can't shoot one. Well, I said, I can't shoot one right-handed. He said, no, you're going to have to shoot right-handed. Well, I shot right-handed, but I put 3 bullets in the guy's target next door to me. And about that time, the lieutenant came along and said, what's wrong, Sergeant? And he said, well, this yahoo's trying to shoot this carbine left-handed. He said, Sergeant, let him shoot the way he wants to shoot. Well, I qualified expert after that because I didn't have any trouble shooting a weapon. Well, to make a long story short, we went to gunnery school. 2 things happened there that I thought were interesting. One is you flew air to air in the back of an AT-6. There's 4 of them based out at Riverside Airport here. I've flown with one of the pilots out there, and you stood in the back with a 30 caliber machine gun to qualify air to air. Now, there was a strap that went between your legs to under your parachute harness, and then back down to the floor, and then you tightened that up. One of the older students told me, said, Okie, when you get in that airplane, stand up, bend your knees slightly, and pull that belt that goes through your parachute harness, pull it tight, so that when you straighten your knees up, you are planted firmly against that airplane. I said, why? He said, you'll find out. Well, I shot my first box of ammunition, and the pilot had said, wiggle your gun when you shoot the first box. Shot my first box, and wiggled the gun, and he went like this, and like this, and like this, and like this, and the next thing I knew, I was looking right straight up at the Gulf of Mexico. And I can understand why the guy had told me that, and I was grateful he had, too. There were guys that didn't fasten the strap and fell out.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, well, they had a parachute on, but nonetheless, that'd be frightening to do that. Then, after gunnery school, we used to do some funny things there. We would throw our clothes over the canal and swim the canal, put our clothes back on, and go into Matamoros when we couldn't have a pass. They knew we were doing it, but nobody said anything. From there, I came to Oklahoma for a delay en route, and then to Plant Park, Florida. Plant Park is in Tampa. It's where the Cincinnati Reds trained before the war. And they had 2 baseball teams there, and I played on one of the baseball teams simply to get out of marching. Then from Plant Park, we were put on a crew, and I met my pilot the day, he wasn't really short, he was about my height, but a really nice looking guy, a little older, came into the barracks and said, I want to know where Donald Forsman is. And I said, well, I'm Donald Forsman. He said, well, my name is Harry O'Grady. I'm your new pilot. And we will go to MacDill Field for training less than a week. About 3 days later, we went to MacDill Field. And Harry O'Grady was a wonderful man. He was, all the rest of us were mainly kids except the guy that was originally assigned as a waist gunner. He was 29. He was an old man. Well, the pilot was 30. We really thought he was over the hill. But, I'm really grateful for his age because he had a sense of caution. He was married, the only one on the crew married. Now, if we'd had to go to war with the co-pilot, we would have landed that B-17 15 feet off the ground every time we landed. But we trained at MacDill. We flew a mission to Scott Field, Illinois, a completely simulated mission. Had to get up at 3:30 in the morning, clean our guns, put our guns in the airplane, take off. I think they had something like 20 airplanes that flew that. But it was really great training because that's exactly what we did when we got overseas. We had some great times in Tampa. It was an interesting place to be. Of course, I'd never hardly been out of the state of Oklahoma. The furthest trip I'd ever had was St. Louis. And it was always an interesting thing. Harry O'Grady was very kind and understanding. He could be tough, but he really, if you didn't know something and you asked, you got an answer, a sensible answer. Well, they sent me up one night because ball turret gunners were supposed to be the assistant radio operator. I didn't know beans from the radio. I knew nothing. I got him lost, I got me lost, and if it hadn't been for the fact that the co-pilot was raised in Florida, we'd have never got home. It's just one disaster after another. And when we got back on the ground, I said, Lieutenant, I really don't like that being the radio operator, assistant radio. You need to find somebody that knows something about radios. Well, our regular radio operator was in ground school taking code and this thing, so, but he never had to have anybody fly for him.
But you were supposed to be the assistant radio operator.
Assistant radio operator.
But they'd never given you any training?
Never any training, no. But the crew training was very thorough. They made you didn't get to lounge around in the rear of the airplane. If you were a ball turret gunner, you were in the ball. If you were a tail turret gunner, you were in the tail. If you were a waist gunner, you were in the waist. If you were a radio operator, you were there. If you were engineer, you were on the flight deck.
Even if you weren't over enemy territory?
Yes, training here in the States. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. They were very much sticklers for that, which is great because you needed that. Well, following the crew training at MacDill, we had an interesting experience real quick. We took our navigator to High Point, North Carolina. His father had died, and we took him up there for the funeral. Pilot got permission to do that. And we spent the night in the airplane, the enlisted men did, and all the officers went into town and stayed in a motel, but we spent the night in that. And the next morning we walked over to this little coffee shop to get some coffee and a donut, and there was cars coming up on the road and everything, and the coffee shop was crowded. And I sat down on this stool and I said to this guy, I said, how come this crowd's coming out? He said, well, got to be 17 in here. I said, yeah, I'm on it. You know, is that right? I said, well, haven't you all ever seen a B-17 before? And he said, yeah. He said, we had one in here 3 weeks ago. It crashed on takeoff. They had come to see us crash, I think. But it was a very short runway, and that's when I knew we had a good pilot. He went down, and I think he stuck the tail wheel in the mud, and he did a short field takeoff. I'm sure he had never been trained for it, but he did it and did it to perfection, and we flew out of there. We went from there to Langley, where our navigator went through PFF training. PFF training was early radar. It's in one of my pictures, it shows two airplanes, one with a white ball hanging where the ball turret is, and the other a ball turret. The white ball was that radar. We bombed many, many times by PFF. Well, to make a long story short, we stayed there, I think it was about a month. And then we got a new airplane assigned and flew it overseas. It had a PFF ball in it. And I thought, well, when we get overseas, I'm going to get taken off of this crew because it doesn't have a ball turret. Well, I should have known, but I didn't. I was too young and naive. I should have known that they weren't going to put a rookie crew in as a lead, and that's the only ones that had the PFF was the lead. And so when we got overseas, we soon discovered that wasn't going to be true.
So you were just ferrying that plane over there.
And we left Langley. We went to Goose Bay, Labrador, and that was where we staged, got everything we needed. However, here it was October, and we still had khakis on. And we went from there to Greenland. I like to we like to froze to death when we had to pull the props through that morning. And landing at WWII West is what we called it. I think it's got another name now. But landing at WWII West, you flew up a floor for 65 miles. And if you missed the runway, you had to go back out and fly back up to Florida again. There wasn't any place to turn around and come back in. And so we took off across that glacier. That's the one that claimed those P-38s after, they dug out after the war. And we flew from Greenland to Valley, Wales. Oh, we landed at Iceland. We threw a big drunk that night. We knew that was our last night, and it was a big one. In fact, when the pilot came through the back, he didn't swing up and go in the front like they did later, but when he came through the back of the airplane, he said, "Whew, every one of you guys get on oxygen." So he made us wear our oxygen mask. He punished us in that way. But we got from Iceland, we flew to Valley, Wales, and we didn't know what we would ever name our airplane, and we thought, naive like, that we'd get an airplane the first week. Well, that's, as I told you a while ago, that's not true. And the first person that got out of the airplane, some kids rushed up and said, "Any gum chum?" And we said, "No gum chum." Now we took that and literally translated it into no gumption. No gumption means, gumption means courage and boldness and so forth. Well, we were no gumption. And we painted a picture on the front of the airplane of Denny Dimwit. You remember that character? You probably don't. You're too young. But anyhow, from our first day on in the 34th, they impressed our pilot with the fact that the reason they hadn't been hit by fighters like some of the other groups is that they flew tight formation. The closer in you are, the more impact your guns will have. You'll have 24 guns in a squadron of plane rather than two here and two here, spread out. Well, we trained for 6 weeks until we got to fly our first mission. And our first mission was almost our last mission. Let me go back a minute. When you're awakened for a mission, they get you up between, it can be any time from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. And it depends on what time your takeoff time is, where you're going, and so forth. So we always ask 2 questions. One, what is the bomb load? If we knew what the bomb load was. And secondly, we ask, how much gasoline? If they said 2740 gasoline, that meant that we were going to go to the end of time and come back. We dressed. You wore long handle underwear, ODs, top and bottom, shirt and pants. I wore a heated suit. Not everybody got to wear heated suits. The only reason the ball turret gunner did was because he was so crowded in the turret anyhow. And if you wore the big fleece line things, you really would have been crowded. And of course, you could not take your parachute in the turret.
When you're in the ball turret, being out there exposed to the elements, was it drafty? I mean, the way you turn sometimes a draft would come in. You've learned not to turn that way very often. And temperatures got down to 60 below zero. Mm-hmm. Well, we went to breakfast, went to communion. I always went to communion. And then we went to briefing. We were briefed on where we were going. They had a big string on the map, and they would open the curtain. You've seen that on TV or something. Briefed on the weather, the number of enemy fighters expected, our fighter escort, if any, and the number of guns, ACAC guns, on the target. And then, of course, takeoff time. After briefing, pilots went one way,
the pilot and co-pilot. Navigators went another way to get the latest weather and such. And we gunners went to clean our guns again and put them in and check the aircraft and check the bomb load, see if it looked proper and everything. When we got over there, the guy that went as our engineer had some really bad experiences, because when we flew our first mission, we lost oxygen to the pilot and co-pilot and the engineer's compartment all at once. We were at 25,000. Pilot realized that he was getting anoxia. He threw the wheels down to show that we were aborting and pulled out of the formation and started down. Now, we weren't in any kind of a spin or anything like that. We were just going down. And we were headed that day for Merleburg, which was a horrendous target. And the pilot and co-pilot finally came to about 10,000 feet, pulled us out, and we went on home.
So they passed. They actually passed.
They
out.
actually passed out. Yeah, we didn't know what was going on. Those of us in the back, we had no idea what was going on. Well, this did something to the engineer when he passed out. He was wedged between the top turret, and they like to never got him out. He was a big guy. They like to never got him where they could get an oxygen mask on him. And he tried to fly again, and they had another harrowing experience, so much so that the two engines caught on fire, and the pilot rang the bailout bell, and Williams got down and popped his chute in the plane, and he couldn't bail out. And when the pilot came down after putting it on autopilot, he pulled his .45 and said, "You're going to fly us in." And he did. They were the only two that lived.
Oh my gosh.
The others froze to death in the channel. Well, when pilot saw that he couldn't go, he moved the waist gunner up to engineer, and he was the armor gunner, and he made me the armor gunner. We didn't have an assistant radio operator, which was fine with me. I'd rather been the armor gunner. We went to Merleburg that day, but we got no credit for the mission, and we got only as far as France and had to abort. So that did not count in the 34 missions I flew. Mission number 2 wasn't bad, except, 5 days later we went to Merleburg, which was mission number 1, and I'm going to refer to my log now, if I may. This is the original log that I kept.
You can bring it over here a little bit. There we go.
And it is,
Yeah.
I wrote it like this. This is what the writing looks like. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know until I was about through with my missions I wasn't supposed to do that. But it didn't make any difference. My navigator asked me when I started home, he said, "You did destroy that log, did you?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I did." Well, where it was down in the bottom of my B4 bag, and I didn't think anybody would dig it out, and nobody asked me anything about it. Well, anyhow, we went back to Merleburg. We'd lost 60 fighters the first day we went to Merleburg.
60 fighters?
60 bombers, I beg your pardon. 60 bombers. That's 600 men.
How many were in the air with you? There were 60 you lost. How many were total?
Well, there must have been about 1,000, I think. I don't really know how many there were. I never put that down, how many there were, but they said, the Tulsa World headlines on December 1st said 86 American planes lost. So that we think that it was about 26 fighters and 60 bombers on that mission. and the Tulsa World said, in one 5-mile radius, American crewmen touched a corner of hell as an estimated 225 ACAC guns pumped up what veterans described as a solid wall of flak. I looked up ahead as we turned on the IP, the initial point in the bomb run, and I said to the pilot, I said, that looks like a thunderstorm up ahead. He said, "Okay, that's flak." He had flown one mission, and it was just black. It was just totally black. Number 2 wasn't bad. It could have been for our tail gunner. Our tail gunner was, we were crossing the bomb line, and a ACAC battery opened up on us from the bomb line, and he reached back to get his flak helmet, and as he did, a piece of flak came through the plexiglass right where his head would have been, and went on through the airplane. It would have taken his head off. He was just here to visit me, and we talked about that experience. Mission number 3 was to Gießen. Stars and Stripes, that official Army newspapers, said the largest force of heavy bombers ever dispatched in daylight on a single mission by the 8th Air Force. 1,600 fortresses and liberated. Now translated, that means 15,900 crew members, planes valued at $622 million formed a column 100 miles long.
Oh my gosh.
And you've seen the planes go over with the contrails. Think what? That many airplanes, what kind of a contrail they had. The German ACAC gunners could easily find us. Missions 4 and 5, we flew on the 12th and 15th day of December 44, and they weren't much. They were what we would describe as milk runs. Mission 4 was visual, meaning that the target was very clear down on the ground, and I was able to follow the bombs all the way to the target, which was the exception and not the rule. Mission number 6 was another story. It was Christmas Eve, 1944, and the 8th Air Force put up what they called a maximum effort. We put not 3 squadrons into the air, we put 4 squadrons into the air. And this 4th squadron with the other groups in our wing, 3 groups in a wing, with the other groups, that made a whole nother group. Mm-hmm. So that we had instead of the 36 times 3, we had 36 times 4. We had 4 groups out of a wing rather than 3. We went to Frankfurt. It was what the 8th Air Force was trying to do was to go past Frankfurt and let the Germans think they were going deeper into Germany, and then when the German fighters came off of the ground, the bomber stream was going to turn and come back and bomb their airfields, and then our fighters were going to come in and have a duck soup while they were trying to find a place to land, and it worked. There was only one problem. When we made the turn, the 180 degree, and came back to bomb Frankfurt, we had about a 45 mile an hour ground speed. The headwind was just atrocious. We had a bomb hang up in the bomb bay. Well, I was the armor gunner, and the pilot said, okay, do your stuff on it. Well, I went out there, and I couldn't reach it with a walk-around bottle and such, and I had my parachute on, and I just couldn't get over my chest pack, So I came back in the radio room, and I said, I can't reach it like with my chest pack on. And he said, well, what are we going to do? We can't close the bomb bay doors till we get that bomb out of there. And I said, well, if Greg will hold me, I'll toggle it out with a screwdriver. So Greg was a great big strapping 6-foot guy. And I said to him, you're going to have to hold me while I drop toggle this bomb out. Well, I told him just before I stepped into the bomb bay and leaned over, and he had hold of my parachute harness. I said, you drop me and I'll never speak to you again. And that's some of that GI humor that you just can't get away. But it took us 45 minutes to cross Frankfurt on Main. They shot at us every step of the way. We saw a guy the flak went off, and it was a red shell, meaning so they could tell what altitude they were at. And it looked like a guy in a rowboat rowing like the devil to get out of the flak. When we came back to our base that night, they said everybody with wounded aboard shoot a red flare. Red flares everywhere. Everybody with low on gasoline shoot a green flare. Everywhere, green flare. Said, all right, just one at a time. And the problem was that one of the other groups that had been ahead of us in the bomber stream had to land at our group because their base was socked in by weather. And we had to feather 2 engines to taxi to the hard stand. We didn't have enough gas. It was just a disaster. I've always wondered what my mother thought when she opened the Tulsa World on December 25th, and it said the greatest Air Force in history hurled at the Germans. 39 bombers and 6 fighters lost. I just know it was hard.
Out of 1,600?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not bad.
No, not bad.
Not bad averages at all. Missions 7 to 11 are fairly normal, nothing much out of the ordinary. On mission number 12, a crew in our barracks, we named Ladies' Toilet, got a direct hit and blew up. That was always a very low day when you went back to the barracks and the crew had been lost. Now, many of these missions were used with PFF or Pathfinder radar, clouds that would be below where you couldn't see the target. Yet that didn't seem to bother German anti-aircraft guns. On mission 13, one of the crews had an engine catch fire and a pilot gave the call to bail out bail, and that's where this Williams had his problem with the pilot and forced him to land the airplane. Mission 14 was one scary dude. We did not drop any bombs. We flew what is called chaff ship. Have you ever heard of a chaff ship?
I know what chaff is. But go ahead and
chaff
explain
is the icicle. And a chaff ship, one from each squadron, flew just carrying chaff. When we went out, that airplane from top to bottom was loaded with boxes of icicle, is really what it is.
What exactly is icicle?
Well, the icicle is stuff you hang on a Christmas tree. It's tinfoil strips, real thin, about like that. And you just, what you did is that you flew underneath the bomber stream, 3,000 feet, and put that chaff out, and hopefully it would draw the anti-aircraft fire rather than the bomber stream. So you were the sitting duck.
Did it work?
Yeah, it helped. I'm sure it helped. When we got back to the base, we said, we don't want this job again, and you never got it again. You only got it one time a tour, and that was enough. Number 15, we went to Dueselberg, and I had probably the most frightening experience of the war. I got stuck in the ball turret, and I didn't get out until we got back to our base. Where's my book? Oh, there it is. This book is a very good book. It has a lot of small stories about them. And I'm in this book but my navigator, when he wrote it up and sent it in, he got a few little facts wrong. One, he said we were going to Berlin that day. Now, I was pretty stupid in those days, but I wasn't stupid enough to go to Berlin stuck in a ball turret. We were going to Dueselberg. The gear train broke, jammed the guns at 45 degrees. I could not get in the airplane, and I couldn't get out of the turret and didn't want to since I didn't have a parachute, but it just stayed at that thing. Well, those are very difficult things to break to where you can get.
Where's the book?
That's right. The American Airman in Europe by Freeman, Roger Freeman, foremost historian for the 8th Air Force. Well, when we went over the target, my waist gunner, a guy by the name of Joe Wider, Joe said to me, Okie, don't sweat it. If we get hit and go down, I'm going with you. You know, that was the kind of camaraderie we had in a bomb crew. Well, they didn't have to do that, but they were very good. They never called any flak out. We were supposed not to have any flak, but we had plenty. But they never called any out. I knew it was going off. I could see it. When they finally got back across the bomb line, they took a gun barrel out and put it in and pried the ring gear until it broke. And when the ring gear broke, then the turret guns came down like this. Now, we couldn't crank them up again, but that didn't matter because we just sort of used them as tail skids when we landed. But I wasn't in it. You just couldn't land in a ball turret or take off. You never were allowed to. Mission 16, 17, 18, we flew support for the Russian Army, going to Chemis, Hop, and Cottbus, Germany. Stars and Stripes had this to say about Cottbus. 1,300 Fortress and Liberator defended by 850 Mustangs and Thunderbolts. By that time, they were able to go with us all the way. Now, the early guys that went over there, they had to contend with fighters with no fighter support. With no fighter support. We had fighter support most of the time. On number 20, we had our first mechanical failure when we lost an engine over France, but we had crossed the bomb line and got credit for the mission and dropped our bombs on a target of opportunity and get credit for the mission. We had terrible contrails that day and clouds. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't even see the wingtips of the airplanes flying out here. You know, it was just terrible. We flew mission 19, 20, 21, and 22 in 4 straight days. Now I can tell you, when you got to about the third one, you didn't care whether you lived or died. You were just so weary. You would come in from a mission, you'd go to bed, you had a hard time sleeping, and you would be up again in 2 hours and go again. And on the 22nd, we came in, and the crews in the barracks that didn't fly that day had used up all the coke that we burned. Instead of coal, we used coke. And so I went over to the colonel's coal bin, and we cut the fence, and I went in and got a bucket and came back and took it to the barracks and went in to get another bucket. And I said, "Hand me that bucket." And the guy said, "If someone hands you that bucket, they're going to be dead too." And it was MPs, and he marched me in front of the colonel. And the colonel said, "What are you stealing coke for?" I said, "Because the guys that didn't fly today burn up all the coke. We're cold. We've flown 4 straight days, and we're cold." And so the next day, he issued a new order that all crews that flew, they got to have a whole bucket of coke themselves. And so I was really the hero of the base. And I didn't get busted after all. When the briefing map was pulled back on the 26th of, this would be February, we were going to Berlin for mission number 23. There were many fighters and heavy flak, just like we would defend our capital. They wanted to defend theirs. And Stars and Stripes said Berlin was staggered for the 2nd time this month, when the 8th Air Force unloaded a record 3,000 tons of bombs and incendiaries on the capital city. Mission 24, 25, and 26, we got our first taste of German fighters. We were headed to Dresden. We got hit just before the IP by about 40 of them. Now that was the day after Hank Arnold had given a speech that said, "The German Air Force is no longer capable of attacking the American Air Force in numbers." Somebody reminded us of that during this 50-minute battle.
Were these ME-109s, or were they?
They were ME-109s and the FW-190s. That may have been the day, I'm not sure it was, but it may have been the day that we saw our first jet. and we thought that was really strange, an airplane flying without a propeller. We saw 3 planes go down from the group in front of us. I don't know whether it was from fighters or flak. I believe it was more from fighters. Our fighters shot down 103 planes in the air and on the ground, and this was our longest mission to date, 10 hours. Now, 10 hours doesn't seem like much, but 10 hours in a ball turret is a long time. Because from the minute the wheels lifted up, when you first got up to about 1,000 feet, you started getting ready to get in the ball turret. Now, if you had to go to the bathroom, you could ask permission to get out, but not when you were over a combat zone. It had to be before the bomb line and after the bomb line. Mission 27, we were pulling pins in France when Joe Wider pulled the arming wheel off of one of the bombs, and the bomb started arming itself. We had never seen this kind of bomb. They were called a naval bomb. We'd never seen it, and all we knew was that once they were armed, they exploded. So I called a pilot and I said, we got a problem, and the problem is this, that bomb is armed and the least little jar and it might explode. He said, salvo them. So I hit the salvo button and dropped them, every one of them. They just dropped out. I don't know what we hit, but we probably hit something. Mission 30, 31, and 32 were getting very nerve-wracking. I would finish when my pilot finished. He was one mission ahead of me. He flew one, and then he flew one as a co-pilot, and then flew us. And so, mission 33, guess where we went? That was the next to last mission, back to Berlin. This was March the 18th, 1945. It was a visual day. It was a day very much like today, beautiful weather. We were bombing the rail yards at Alexander Plaza, and I saw our bombs hit and just sort of march across the city. We just barely missed the Reichstag building, but we just blew to thunder. A church there with a gold dome. I remember that. I can still see it in my mind's eye. And it was a sight that I'll always remember. Well, we did hit the target, which was the rail yards there at Alexander Plaza. But I have a sort of an addendum to that story that I'll get to in a minute. Mission 34 was March the 19th, 1945. It was the end of our tour for No Gum Chum. We hit the Gina camera works, micro camera works, using anti-personnel bombs. We were simply trying to put them out of business. But that was the end of the missions for me. I was asked to fly one more mission. Colonel called me, or the Major called me in, Major Travasti, our squadron commander, and said, okay, if you fly one more mission, I'll give you another cluster to your air medal, even though that'll only be 35. I'm going to forget that other one. And I said, Colonel, you know what you can do with that cluster. That plane was shot down that day. They were rescued, the crew was, by the American Army, but they were shot down that day. One of the things I brought home that I always thought was interesting was a certificate that said, you are now a member of the Lucky Bastard Club. Now, have you ever heard it? Mm-hmm. Well, it goes like this. O hero of combat, pride of a nation, be medaled receiver of high decoration, object of womanhood's rapturous sighs, battle-scarred veteran of war in the skies, you've completed your tour with undaunted soul, though flak bursts have threatened your flying control. You have flown many missions and maintained your stance, determined in purpose, though damp in your pants. You have blasted the Nazis with thousands of tongues, of explosive and pulled all the sting from their guns. You have paved the way for the march through the Ruhr. You have helped to make freedom and victory sure. Crusader for righteousness, Galahad, you will never receive all the honors you're due. So go home to your whiskey, your women, and jive. You're a lucky bastard to be alive. Now, you know, I never realized how true that was till I went to Dayton for the 8th Air Force reunion back several years ago. And do you realize that 50,000 men were killed and lost their lives in the 8th Air Force alone? 50,000. So there's
That's not just shot down or captured.
No,
that's
no.
Killed.
That is KIA.
That word.
Yeah. When I come to March 19th every year, you can see why I thank the great God above. Mm-hmm. Well, I said there was a sort of a summary to this Mission 33 where we hit the church. In 1992, my wife and I took a tour through Russia and Sweden, Finland, Russia, Poland, and back, and we came to Berlin. We were staying in Alexander Plaza, the rail yard area, the hotel right across. They took us into this gorgeous cathedral, and you know, I kept having deja vu in my own thoughts as the guide came up the aisle, I said to her, "Was this cathedral always like this even through the war?" "Oh, no," she said. "This cathedral was very badly damaged." I said, "Yes, I know." I said, "Well, why is it just getting back into operation?" She said, "Because the communists made us tear down the chapel because it housed the bones of the German aristocracy, and they didn't want those people coming back and fighting them again. So they had reopened it, and so we went to a 5 o'clock Vesper service. Our tour group was going out for a $100 a plate dinner. I want to tell you, Methodist preachers don't eat many $100 a plate dinner. So we went to the service, and as an old priest and a very young girl came down the aisle in their robes, the girl stopped and said to us and to another couple, obviously tourists with cameras and everything, "Would you all have coffee with us after the service?" And we said, "Well, certainly." So we went. And I said to the priest, I said, "I don't understand. Why did it take so long?" "Oh," he said, and he told me this about the German aristocracy. And I said, "Well, you know," he said, "you know, our church was very badly damaged during World War II." I said, "Yes, I know, March the 18th, 1945. Yeah. He said, "I was the priest. I was 17 years old and the priest in the church." And I said, "Is that right?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "You know, I've always had a very odd feeling about hitting that church. Ever since I went into the ministry, I've always had a terrible guilt feeling about it." And the old priest, I can already tell this without choking up, the old priest leaned over, patted me on the knee and said, "It's all right. It's all right." And you know it was. I really realized at that moment I must have forgiven myself. I didn't drop the bombs, but it didn't make any difference. I was there and I saw it and I knew it. You know, I'm just very grateful for my crew. I showed you a picture of the crew and you can show it, but the pilot, co-pilot, all of the people in the, this is it right there.
Now, which one
Okay,
is you?
this is Joe Wider, the waist gunner.
Right there, okay.
Yeah, and this is the co-pilot,
Okay.
Wayman Carver.
Okay.
Harry O'Grady,
Right
the
here.
pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Grigorski. Wait a minute, I got to look. Oh, that's Bud Proctor, the navigator.
Oops,
See, we didn't handle a bombardier. Charles Grigorski, the radio operator. Earl Strotter down here was the toggelier, or what we would have called a bombardier. This is Al Koenig. Al Koenig was the engineer, and next is myself.
Right
And-
there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this is, over here is, I bet I got that wrong. Yeah, this is Merle Russell, the tail gunner, way over here, at this side.
On that side there?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And then this is Earl Strata, the toggleier over there.
All
Sorry
right.
about that.
Well, that's okay.
I'm looking at it
Hard
upside
to see
down.
backwards.
Yeah, it is. But anyhow, they were a great crew. And the interesting thing is, only the 4 enlisted men now, not this one. This one enlisted man has died. And Joe Wider, we don't have any idea where Joe is. We never could find him after the war. But the 4 enlisted men are the only ones yet alive. The rest of them are deceased. But I came home and I started college, Tulsa University, in engineering. And I took my first 2 years in engineering, petroleum engineering. I was going to be a petroleum engineer and make lots of money. And then I had a call to preach. And I spent 45 years in the Methodist ministry. Retired in 1990 back here in Tulsa. But we have had a wonderful life. We've been married now 57 years. We have 2 sons and 6 grandchildren. I'm going to get to marry the only granddaughter in November of this year. So we've had a wonderful time. Now, in one of the pictures that you'll put in this, where you show me, they're going to see a name, Skeeter. Skeeter was the name of a young woman that I met at Langley Field, Virginia, when we were there. I only knew her less than a month, but we sort of promised ourselves to each other. And I appreciate the fact that she sort of helped keep me clean during World War II, if you know what I mean. And right below that picture of me outside the ball with the name Skeeter is a scar on the fuselage. That piece of flak came from that. I don't know whether they can see that or not. And that's stuck in the fuselage there, and it was pretty well spent, I guess, but it's still, you can see the dent it put into it. Flak hitting an airplane is like someone throwing a handful of gravel, big old rock gravel, on a tin roof. That's what it feels like, and it can shake the whole airplane. Just a little shell like that can make the whole airplane quiver. It is really something else. While I wasn't extremely religious during World War II, I did carry a Bible. My mother gave me a little New Testament, and I carried it in my pocket. And it was, I was grateful for that, because I read it on occasion, not every night or anything like that. Because I don't want anybody to think I was too holy during those days, because I certainly wasn't. But I had to change my living when I went into the ministry. And I went on and got my ministry degree at Perkins School of Theology in Dallas, and finally worked on my doctorate and finished my doctorate, and did that at Iliff School of Theology in Denver. It's been a good life, and I think we're almost to the end of the hour. And do you have any more questions you'd like?
Well, we have about 3 minutes left on the tape. I just wanted to kind of, one of the things you mentioned is that that they, as soon as you took off, you had to get into the ball. Why would they let you wait until you got closer to the target before you got in? I mean, what was the point of getting in the ball so early in the mission?
Well, because German fighters came across the channel.
Even at that point in the war,
yes.
They were still coming.
Yeah, even
there.
though it was late in the war, they were
Okay.
still coming across the channel.
So you had to be prepared.
You remember Glenn Miller got shot down while we were flying a combat mission one day, and we were told to look for his airplane. We didn't know who it was. They just said it's a very high profile celebrity. Look for the wreckage of the airplane. And they were shot down by night fighters. See, you're forming in the dark a lot of times. and it's very difficult to form. You take off, now by the time you start forming, it's beginning to get light. And you'll notice on the pictures, for instance, that our group is marked with the big red tail. That is so we'd know what group to form with. Every group had a different marking, and our big red tail was good. We think that we didn't get hit by fighters because we flew such tight formation. The 100th bomb group got lambasted every time they went out. You've heard the stories of the 100 and why they got lambasted.
Now, as a ball turret gunner, did you ever shoot any planes?
At Dresden, I think I got some hits on a FW-190, but I didn't get any successes. You know what? To get a kill as a gunner, you had to see the plane hit the ground. Well, in the midst of a battle, you're not going to take time to look for that airplane to hit the ground, whether you want to get credit for a kill or not. But I wouldn't take $1 million for the World War II experiences for me personally, but I wouldn't want to go through them again. And I hope none of my grandkids have to go through that.
Well, we're just about out of tape here. Is there anything you'd like to add in closing?
No, other than the fact that I appreciate the Library of Congress for recording these of those of us that are dying at a clip of 1,000 a day. One of these days we're all going to be gone, and if they don't do this, then they're going to lose these stories forever. And we were not a flashy crew. We flew a mission one time in MacDill in the Memphis Belle, but we were no crew like the Memphis Belle. They were a celebrity crew and such, but we were just an ordinary crew, and you just think about the fact, most of the crews were just ordinary crews.
Well, I want to thank you for your service to the country, as I'm sure anyone who's watching this will think the same. So, and thank you for allowing us in your home to interview you tonight.
Well, I'm just delighted to do it, and I want to thank you for doing this
Oh,
for us.
Okay. Okay, well, this will conclude the